I think you really have to imagine all the steps that might trip up the customer. I mean, everyone says, put yourself in the user's shoes. I think it all comes down to that. Really imagine yourself doing it, going through everything.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, where Gowri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Okay. Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Hannah Gilberg, User Documentation Director at Navis. Welcome, Hannah, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Gowri.
Thank you. And once again, I would like to apologize for making you to be awake at such an early hours. But thank you so much for connecting with us today to share your experience. So Hannah, let me just let you introduce a little bit more about yourself and your initial experiences with documentation. How did you start this journey?
First, right now, I run the documentation for a company in Oakland, California that manages cargo logistics. Before I started working for them, I had gone through a technical writing program, a master's program, and it's very different from what I imagined I'd be doing when I was in college. I thought I wanted to be a writer. I wrote short stories, and I had this idea I'd get a job in publishing, like as an editor. So, I tried that, and it was very difficult breaking in, and the pay wasn't very good. So a friend of mine had been going through this master's program, and it seemed like something that would appeal to me. It combined both writing and graphic design and business. So I enrolled, and it's funny that you asked this question because now when I'm interviewing for new tech doc candidates for my team, this is a question that I ask as well because it's really interesting. People come to technical documentation from all different fields. The answer is never the same.
True, very true. Yeah. Okay, super. So how was your documentation process at Navis, Hannah, and who do you normally get involved in defining such processes?
Well, we use AuthorIt to maintain our content. And from AuthorIt, we publish to WebHelp, and then that WebHelp is built into the application and hosted on our Salesforce support side. And we also post our content as PDFs. But as far as like how we actually get that content together, of course, we work with the engineers. We use Agile at our company. So each of our writers handles 2 to 3 Agile teams. And we use Jira, the Atlassian bug tracking tool, as kind of like our central focus for how we manage the beginning of all the content. So basically, it all starts from a Jira issue. Mm-hmm. And the Jira issues are marked for which Agile team they're for, so we can just create these dashboards to track what we have outstanding, and we have our own tab for tracking all the information that we need against that issue. So we can see, which ones need a release note, which need doc updates, which have critical actions like schema changes that need to be communicated. We've created our way to just manage our whole workflow alongside the engineers from within the same issues that they're using for themselves.
Fantastic. I think that was my next question. Like, how do you manage your documentation workflow? So I'm guessing it all comes as part of the whole documentation process.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so I know there's lots to consider when creating documentation, right? So, according to you or your company, what are the important factors to consider when creating documentation, Hannah?
Well, we have a lot of content. If you were to publish out everything, it would be, around 10,000 pages of content. So the critical thing for us is to be able to make things findable. We have everything bundled into one compiled help set, kind of like a knowledge base. But what's interesting is that you might have information, but if you haven't given the topic the right heading, or if it's not in the area where people would expect it, it's really easy for users not be able to find the information. So I use our case reports from Salesforce to identify those cases that really the customers should have been able to find because the information was there. Mm-hmm. In some form, it was there, but it was just maybe we didn't use the right terminology, or maybe we needed to create a troubleshooting topic that identified that gotcha that the user encountered that otherwise was just buried at the bottom of a topic, in a note. So I don't think it's enough to say, well, yeah, it was in the documentation. It has to pop up, close to the top when a user is putting in a search, or else it's not. They're not going to find it. It's like it's not there.
Yeah, understand. So that's good. Yeah. So mostly customer search is one of the main factors you consider when creating documentation.
Yeah.
All right, that's good. So let's talk a little bit about your team, Hannah. So can you help me understand how big is your documentation team?
Sure. So there's, excuse me, there's like a total of 8 of us. Right now, we also have a contractor, but 5 of the writers are in India, and 3 of us are in Oakland.
Okay. Super. So how do you report on your documentation, or what do you consider while reporting on documentation, and who do you report to, please?
Our team reports into QA. Well, it's referred to as shared services, so it includes QA, DevOps, and documentation. And basically what I'm looking at is cases that could have been deflected with better documentation. So those are the numbers that I'm tracking. And also JIRA issues that come in from cases that could have been avoided with documentation.
Absolutely.
And we also look at CSAT. We run customer satisfaction surveys every year, and we have a small group of topic or questions that have to do with customer enablement. So we look at that as well.
Fantastic. So in your opinion, what has been the most important innovation when it comes to document tracking? It could be during your career, or something that really made you to, that wow moment, the most important innovation.
The thing that really moved the needle for us, to use a phrase, was integrating our documentation with our Coveo federated search on our support site. So when customers search on something, when they go to support and just put in a keyword search, our whole body of documentation is now included in that. Before it wasn't, because the way that Salesforce is set up, you can't actually build in a help set. They use knowledge articles, not compiled help sets. So we had all this rich information added into customer searches. And that changed everything. And it was interesting because at the same time that we introduced this search, our overall CSAT scores started to go up. That may have been coincidental. I mean, our enablement scores were going up as well, but it did seem like customers were really responding to the ability to have easy access to all that content rather than just downloading everything or searching on it from the application.
Mm-hmm. Super. So I know we spoke a lot about customers being able to find your documentation before even they raise the support ticket. So is your documentation publicly available to general public, or is it only for your customers?
It's only for the customers, yeah.
Okay.
So you can't do a Google search on it.
Okay, so no organic search traffic can be generated.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to log in first to the site.
Fantastic. So, do you have a personal philosophy when it comes to the documentation process? Of course, you did mention that customers, what they look for, of course, is a main factor. But any personal philosophy when it comes to the whole process?
Yeah, I think you really have to imagine all the steps that might trip up the customer. I mean, everyone says, put yourself in the user's shoes. I think it all comes down to that. Really imagine yourself doing it, going through everything. If you're not going through it yourself, to try to figure out where there could be any ambiguities. That's the critical thing. Well, the reason why it seems obvious, but because we're working on a pretty complex documentation set, the software is complex. We're getting a lot of information from engineers. I think that there's an incredible tendency for writers that are under the gun to just push forward words that have been given to them by the engineer, and that you really need to step back and ask yourself, does this make sense to me? And make it make sense. Ask the questions so that it makes sense. Make sure that all of your questions are answered and that the content flows in your mind. You can imagine one point going to the next.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And again, we spoke quite a lot about customers and looking after them and making sure they get what they want, and if not, give the right content, right? So do you believe there is a way to connect with the user by connecting with the content first?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that there's this fine line, like if you are too close to the functionality, you can often miss those things that could trip up the user. So I think that, you do need to get your hands on it to be able to identify all the things that would be confusing. But I feel like it's important to have kind of like a beginner's mind, because that's how the user who's new to the feature, that's the state they're going to be in. They're not going to make, any assumptions that the engineer might make when using the software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's true. Super, Hannah. So my next question is, you've been a director of user documentation at Navis for about a year now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, your first year in that position took place during the pandemic. So what techniques and innovations have you implemented in that time to help your team stay motivated and focused?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And when I listened to podcasts in the past year, this is what I was looking for, tips for doing this. I try to do something creative with the team. What we're doing now is that we are working on what are called exquisite. It's called an exquisite corpse. It kind of sounds awful, but basically we take turns writing a story. Each time period, we meet every 2 weeks as both teams together. One person will start a story, and then it's handed off to the next one, and each one adds to it. And so by the time all of us have filled in something, we have like this really interesting little story that we've created together. And then the person who started it can see what happens. They had their own idea in their head of how it would unfold, and it turns into something completely different. So it's a way for us to kind of like be engaged together and do something creative, and just be aware of how other people are thinking about things when we introduce something.
Yeah, true. So does the conclusion is given to the person who initiated the story, or you decide to stay with the conclusion, whoever wrote it?
Oh, so the conclusion is written by the last person in line. We kind of like rotate. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That sounds very interesting. Super. So I think we are to the rapid fire round now. So just 3 questions to go. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
I've learned the most from Salesforce. Our company uses Salesforce, and so I had the opportunity to see their documentation, and I really, really love the way they organize their content, their release notes for the season releases. In fact, I actually reached out to one of their writers just to ask them about how they created their API documentation. And on their site, they have I think it's through Trailblazer. Trailblazer is wonderful, by the way. I think it's just really good. And they have a section where they describe their tone, their writing tone for, guidelines for writers who want to write for Trailblazer. And so I had our writers look at that because I just thought it was great.
Fantastic. So Salesforce, great. So you did mention that you listen to a lot of podcasts. And so can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed recently?
Yeah, actually, just last week, one of my writers got a missing DLL error. And when she was publishing, so this isn't a podcast, so, it's like actual documentation that I ended up finding for her, and just through research, it was just troubleshooting, and it solved her problem. And it was nothing glamorous. The page itself wasn't that fancy, but it made the problem go away. So I really appreciated that we were able to just look something up and solve a problem.
Fantastic. That's great. So I think this is the favorite question a lot of my guests enjoy answering. So what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Yeah. I would say, realize that everyone is solving problems in this line of work. And you should just always expect problems because we work in a field that is filled with them. What will set you apart is your ability to ask the right questions. Just be dependable. That's actually, that means a lot. Just sticking with it and just keep trying to solve all those problems. And you'll do fine.
Fantastic. Great. That I think I've not heard many guests talking about this point, Hannah. So that's really good. Thank you. Anything else I have missed to ask you today that you would like to share with our audiences?
Well, no. I mean, I think that this, I was thinking to share with the team about how we use this content quality criteria. We have this way of ensuring that our quality is really high by having like a list of various criteria that each topic has to meet. And they basically focus on the areas of clarity, coherence, and completion. So it's the way to let the writers know when they're on the mark or off the mark with their content. I think that this has also become a very important thing to ensure our content is high quality.
Fantastic. That's great. And thank you for sharing this additional information, Hannah. So once again, it was great connecting with you, and you did share some of the valuable points like putting customers' requests first and making sure that support tickets to be kept minimum by providing the right documentation. So it's an amazing journey. And as I mentioned, your innovative ideas during the pandemic time is definitely something to appreciate, Hannah. So enjoy the rest of the day. And once again, thank you for connecting with us.
Well, thank you, Gowri.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.